Hello, welcome back to the Gen AI Ops podcast. Today we are joined by James Luke, who is the CEO and founder of Doability, and my co-host Jamie, as always. So today we're on episode 7, which is mainly talking about elegant systems, embracing complexity, and empowering simplicity. So first of all, James, tell us a little bit about Doability.
So I founded Doability.ai in January this year. My background is I've spent over 30 years in corporate life. I first got into AI at the age of 11. I was one of Sinclair's children with a ZX81, desperately trying to program machine learning systems and AI with 1 kilobyte of memory. I joined the Royal Navy from school, and then 6 years later was made redundant. I'd never worked on a real project, so I wrote to the top Formula One team at the time, it was the Williams Formula One team, and said, I can use AI to transform your business. And I made every mistake it was possible to make. They gave me a great reference. I got a job with a company that was subsequently taken over by IBM, and I spent the next 30 years building real AI systems in a whole host of applications. And then at the age of 55, at Christmas, I decided it's time to step back from corporate life, never see another risk register, never go to a board meeting, and just focus on sharing my experience. So what I'm really about in Doability, I'm not trying to grow the company beyond me. I'm not trying to do anything in terms of pushing particular products. I'm just trying to share my experience of making mistakes. And with this amount of gray hair, you can see I've made a lot of mistakes and hopefully help you avoid making those mistakes.
Perfect. Okay, so biggest topic of the year, right, of the day right now is obviously ChatGPT 5, which we'll come to soon. But I think the first step is that we've got 2 manifesto items to go over as always. Jamie, what are they?
So yeah, starting off with one which when we had our event at the House of Lords, which I actually spoke about, and this is embracing complexity and seeking simplicity by leveraging generative AI to solve real-world problems efficiently and adaptively, empowering our teams to innovate with ease and focus. So when I sort of discussed that at the House of Lords, James, I was pretty much saying that there is always a temptation with AI, undeterministic technology where it's not always like coding of you get A and you get B, but it's more variable and random. And with that, I suppose, randomness, there is that temptation to impede a lot of more sort of additional steps and control on these systems. However, the downside I've found from my own experience of engineering it in that way usually is that it sort of restricts the model's power actually and ability to, especially in something like a chat interface, fulfill the instructions of the user to a high level of quality. And I sort of advocated that usually with generative AI, the best systems and the best design is as simple as possible and just let the model do the work in a sense. So coming back to that manifesto point of embracing complexity and seeking simplicity with generative AI, what do you sort of take that manifesto point to be, and what is the importance of that in the world of generative AI where it is all moving so fast and there is a lot of different variables to building these systems?
So I think there are a couple of points here that are really important. I mean, firstly, understand when you should be using generative AI. I remember a conversation 10 years ago with a very senior executive. I'm not mentioning the name or where that executive is now, but he's very, very senior in AI for one of the big hyperscalers. And I sat in a meeting room and he said, AI systems, we called them cognitive systems in those days in IBM, cognitive systems should never be deterministic. They should never, it impedes what they're trying to achieve. And I can prove to you mathematically why it's acceptable for cognitive systems to make mistakes and how it gives you a better overall performance and why you should embrace non-determinism. And my answer to him was that the British Airways pilot flying me home 5 hours after that was a cognitive system, but quite deterministic at landing 777s at Heathrow. We in society, we embrace generative, experimental, innovative approaches in certain scenarios, but not in others. and we need to understand where that determinism exists and when it shouldn't. The problem is when you basically say get rid of all the controls, you get to a situation which, again, I've seen, where the performance of the AI system changes, its behavior changes, depending upon how much memory it's got in the system, how many threads there are, whether or not, and that's not really acceptable in many situations. If I train an AI model and I'm going to deploy that, and I need to be able to explain its performance, and I need to be able to stand up in the future and justify its decisions, I need to be able to recreate exactly what was there at that time. So determinism in some of the engineering processes, there's nothing wrong with that. Determinism in the function of the system once it's operating, or non-determinism, may be something we wish to embrace, but know when you want to embrace it. I see a huge amount out there at the moment about controlling hallucinations in generative AI. I use generative AI quite extensively, and I'm doing a lot of work now on how I can use generative AI in open source intelligence applications. And what I'm doing is I'm going under the hood of the generative AI. I'm using the large language models. I mean, they're phenomenal technologies, but I'm going under the hood and I'm using them for things they're really, really powerful at. And then I'm giving them incredibly tight prompts. I'm not using them as general search engines. And I can give you example after example of where they break down because of that probabilistic reasoning and are not suitable for that general search. So I think the first thing is, before we start saying, yes, we need controls, we don't need controls, understand when you should be using the technology and when you shouldn't. I have to say this, AI is more than generative AI. Yeah. AI is more than machine learning. AI is more than, the fact that we still have people saying to us, that's not machine learning, it's not AI, is just a nonsense. In fact, I think, which is terrible marketing from my point of view, I'm thinking of starting a campaign saying there's no such thing as AI, which is dreadful because I just branded my entire company AI. The whole concept of AI is it's the science and engineering of creating machines that perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence. So the moment the machine can do it, it no longer requires human intelligence. Therefore, it's not AI. So the AI paradox, it doesn't exist as a concept. And we've got to get beyond this AI is all about generative. I think then I would come on to the controls. And yes, I think in certain situations, we should just let the AI do the whole thing. But we should always it's good practice to put some form of monitoring and supervision around any AI system. So I worked on a lot of systems that were performing tasks such as entity extraction, relationship extraction, constructing network diagrams. And what we found was they worked, like all AI systems, they work extremely well when operating in the environment for which they were trained. But when someone changed the document format, or they put in new content, so someone pushed in foreign language content, you suddenly saw them perform very badly. So I had one system where the system was extracting all the names, organizations, and relationships between them in documents. And suddenly overnight, instead of extracting 20 entities per document on average, the system started extracting 60. And what we discovered was a new source of content had been added in that had a cover page, and there's a distribution list on the cover page, and the system was finding all the names from the distribution list. It was operating in an environment for which had not been defined. So putting a monitor around that to say, what are the average number of entities per document? Why we suddenly had a step up in that? Is this system now performing out of its bounds? Those levels of monitoring and supervision, I think, are essential in any system you define.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we just released the Gen AI Ops ebook, and we guardrails there and everything like that are very heavily mentioned. And I think you're right. Two points there to address is number one is there are still a plethora of businesses that are looking into AI that haven't even got step zero done of looking at their data, looking how it works together. How even we've got clients that don't even have relational databases yet. And it's like you cannot go anywhere near this stuff until everything is at bare minimum digitized. Yep. But also then, seeing how these data points intertwine, you don't know that until everything is, I mean, I'm a big believer in shoving everything into a vector database and actually then just waiting to see what you find, right? Because you're nearly always surprised. But I think, that's a really, really interesting point that, you put garbage in, you get garbage out, right? And people are getting really, really excited by this concept, but actually there's a lot of preparative work that you need to do before you can even start looking at this. And I think your second point around AI is really interesting. You know, I mean, I was speaking at an event a couple of weeks ago, and, you know, everyone poo-poos automation and things like UiPath, which have been super, super valuable for the last 10 years for everyone involved, right? And now suddenly LLMs have come out, and automation and process automation and things like that suddenly aren't AI anymore. And before LLMs came out, they were the pinnacle of AI, and everyone thought it was really cool, you know, separate to machine learning. And I think it's very interesting to see that as technology advances, the lower realms of that technology, which were once referred to as AI, are being, oh, now that's just tech, you know. And I find that fascinating that they older technology, which still falls under the guise of AI, is almost being devalued in favor of all these things. But they all do the same, you know, they all have their own operative, you know, you've got GPT agent mode, right? And it will go and do stuff for you. That's exactly the same without the preemptive training, so to speak, as how UiPath has been working for the last 10 years. And everyone gets really, you know, oh my goodness, this is amazing. But actually, that's been around, that as a technology and as a concept has been around for a very long time. It's just now you don't have to physically go and record your every move and press play to make it happen, you know? So that's really interesting.
There's a cultural thing, isn't there? I mean, the technology gets disallowed. So I've actually had a working operational system where a client has said to me, a government client, we're not allowed to buy that because it doesn't use AI. And then they said, and it did use AI, but not machine learning.
Right.
I'd argue it actually used machine learning, but not neural networks. And they then said, but can you use it to develop training data so we can build a machine learning model? And machine learning is an admission of ignorance. You develop training data when you can't specify the system manually. And so why would you take a system that's working and create a poor copy of it using machine learning? I think the other point on the culture is data. When people look at data, I always get told there's too much of it. We can't look at it. There's a scene in the film Enigma where the code breaker goes back into the shed and he says, show me the raw signals. And he just wants to get a feel for them. And I do the same in every project. Show me the actual data. You can't. There are 4 terabytes. There are 50 trillion rows of data. Right, I'll look at 10 of them. I want to see the real data because that's when you go in and you see the postcodes are incomplete. You see there are foreign characters in there. You see the non-relational database has left hard character returns at the end of every line instead of every sentence. You need to look at the data. But whenever something goes wrong, the first response is we need a better algorithm. We need more intelligence. It's not, let's have a look at the data and clean it up.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting. Okay.
And do you have any thoughts on regarding the data for generative AI specifically? Any tips around maintaining simplicity around that process? I'm not sure how sort of closely you work with like RAG and stuff, but is there anything when you are uploading to a vector database you can do to make sure that the data is somewhat structured to be able to help the RAG perform optimally?
I'm actually very worried about this. I speak to an awful lot of organizations, and I've been in organizations where the answer to delivering AI is to take our current content, use RAG, use some fine tuning, and build our own expert LLM. And that's the answer. Once we've done that, we've solved the problem. I actually think that many of those are projects. I think they'll be successful, but I think a lot of it will just become commoditized. And I've done it. I've bought servers that we put in a machine room because we didn't want our content shared. So we're building our own knowledge engineer, our own superior advisor. And I have no doubt that companies like Microsoft will just roll that out as part of the next product suite. And all that work we've done will have been not wasted, but not. I think I have an issue, though, that what we're doing with a lot of these systems, and I agree with the need for simplicity, but I also think that where we're going with content at the moment is quite dangerous. People are assuming the LLM will work it all out. And what I would be advocating is that we start focusing very much on curated content. We start really understanding our content, and we start managing that content and putting in place things like conflict checking, putting in place anomaly detection. So if system says, if in the content the system says James Luke was in Southampton and James Luke was in Glasgow and the time difference was 15 minutes, that's a conflict. Those two things could not happen. And I think we need to look at putting some better techniques in there. I worry that with content generation, I know a lot of people are talking about this, it's that generative AI is going to start eating its own tail. And so I'm a big fan of the simplicity, but I come back to make sure you're scoping your system correctly. I also think that we need better tooling to actually allow visualization. So I said earlier about people don't want to look at the data. I built a system, it was for use in police investigations. And we had a situation where when the police do an investigation, they have to read every document. They have to manually read every document because you can't go to court without that evidential trail. And so they have 200,000 pages of text to read. That sets the length of the investigation of 3 years. And we currently give them a choice between use automated AI to do it. That gets you 80% accuracy in an answer in 2 seconds. Or do it manually, that gets you human quality accuracy in 3 years. And what we built was a visualization tool aimed at simplifying it. So that, and what happened was whenever the police officer selected something, so they saw James Luke driving W563 WDL, they said James Luke's an entity person, W563 WDL is a vehicle. The tool went away, found all the other examples of that and said, so are these all the same? And we visualized it in a way where the officer could rapidly confirm it. So what they got was human quality accuracy in about 18 hours instead of 3 years. Now, you always have a problem with users. When you take something that takes 3 years down to 18 hours, the user's response is always, it's too slow. 3 years is a big, long project. 3 microseconds is what the user expects. Anything, around 2 or 3 minutes or 18 hours, that's just slow. Because you've gone from the expectations gone that this is a massive transformation down to something we're just doing badly. But actually, we're doing quite, so we took it down to 18 hours, but we put simplicity into the tooling. And so we made it easier. I think we shy away. We shy away in IT, or we have a different threshold for what we mean by simplicity. So in IT, we talk about reuse a lot. We talk about, in engineering in general, we talk about few moving parts, keep your number of components to a minimum. And yet we build Boeing 747s and nuclear power plants and nuclear reactors because we provide the engineers with the tool to simplify what is a massively complicated supply chain process and a massively complicated obsolescence process. So it's don't try and simplify what you're doing, provide the tooling to simplify the processes around it. I think if the software industry built hardware, there would only be one size of nut and bolt and screw and washer. There'd only be one value of a resistor because we've got to reuse everything. So you can have a 100K resistor and you can have a 1.5 inch bolt, and that's it. You've got to build everything out of that. But if you look
that's simplicity at its finest, right? Which is one of our one of our manifesto points.
Understand where the simplicity is. The simplicity in the hardware industry is having a set of standards and having different sizes and a rapid way of measuring it and a common language so everybody understands it and the tooling to manage that whole process. And that's what we need with these tools, with these systems.
Yeah, but I think you wouldn't get on a plane if every bolt was if every single bolt was the same. You probably wouldn't trust it to fly, right? So I think there is a happy medium we have to come up with, which is.
I'd love to see what it looked like. and that's the point.
I'm sure you could shove it into ChatGPT and it would perfectly, emulate a picture of it for you. So that's really interesting.
It's when we started AI. AI has been driven by small teams trying to do things simply and easily. So the underlying line code for ChatGPT is 100 lines of code that actually runs the core, ML side of it it's tiny because AI has always been approached with small teams trying to do things very simply and very efficiently. But when you actually look at big engineering projects, and building the equivalent of human intelligence, I'm going to suggest it's perhaps the biggest engineering project the world has ever attempted. And so we shouldn't assume the simplicity is in the system. Maybe the simplicity should be in the processes and the tooling around the system.
Yeah, definitely.
No, for sure. Cool.
I think that's really interesting, because that's actually what I wrote my thesis on, was actually how you write these algorithms in the most efficient way so they can run in close to real time. But anyway, next point, Jamie. What's point number 5?
So point number 5, we empower through continuous learning by evolving alongside our models, fostering growth that aligns with our purpose to make generative AI smarter and more efficient. So obviously, I think we're all aware of how quickly the Gen AI moves on, how quickly the models are being released. What do you think the importance is in having systems that are easy to I suppose to continuously stay on top of all of the new models? What is the sort, for example, we had ChatGPT 5 came out. There was a race to sort of understand not just the sort of go-to benchmarks, but the actual effectiveness in practice. What do you think is the importance of, I suppose, firstly, learning from each other, learning quickly in this world of generative AI, and actually getting to the root of, I suppose, how good these models actually are?
So for me, this is all, if you go back to how we've procured these systems over many years. Not so long ago, 10, 15 years ago, in fact, probably still happening now, but definitely 10 or 15 years ago, an organization would want a system to perform a function such as entity extraction or classification, and they would issue an ITT, they would issue a formal tender. Companies, search engine providers would respond. There would be some sort of evaluation. I worked on a number of them. The evaluations would take several weeks, where they brought the tools on site, you installed them, you ran a series of tests, and they chose product X, and that product X had a 5-year deal. And that was it. And it was really challenging because a lot of those tests were static. They didn't take into account your ability to evolve and adapt. We did one, it was in IBM, and we always joked in IBM that a lot of our software was designed by PhDs for PhDs, was very complex and very hard to configure. And we had a client who basically creates 8 rooms, put in a server in each room. They invited us out there. We had a week to install our software, they then gave us some data, a week to train and tune our system. And then they started giving us questions, and it was like a programming competition. They gave you a question, and when you went back for the answer, they scored you on that answer, and then they gave you the next question. And you were rated on how many questions you got. And the questions were things like, how many people entered the country on this date associated with this organized crime group? And they're quite complex questions. And most of our competitors had their software installed on the Monday of week 1, and then had nothing to do. And in the second week, they would set the training systems off, and by lunchtime of the Monday, they were done and they had nothing to do. And then they were ready for the testing the following week. On the evening of the last Thursday of test week, I was on a phone call at 2:00 in the morning over versions of JDKs installed on one of the servers that were causing a clash, as IBM and my team were trying to make our stuff work together. But we won the programming competition, because we were answering questions that were complex, and we had the ability to adapt and move our system and learn through the process. So static versus fixed was a real ease of use, ease of evaluation was a challenge. But roll forward, and we need to go further than that now. What we need now, and I've been advocating this for some time, is rather than have that static test, what you should have is a service-defined architecture. You should be defining your test criteria up front, your test cases, and you should have automated testing that can run those, whether it's functional testing or actual performance testing into performance in terms of accuracy and quality of output. And that should be running continuously. And if you're linking to an AI language and natural language understanding system, you should be connecting to the 2 or 3 of those models, and you should be continuously evaluating against them and potentially switching between them depending upon the quality of their output and the cost of running the models, because of course cost is a huge factor in the operation of these systems. And that should be a process that's just continually running and dashboarded. So again, we talk about simplicity. The simplicity should be visible to the user in an administration term. The dashboard should state very clearly, this is the quality you're getting. This is the cost of getting that quality. These are the alternatives. And here's a big red flag. Such and such have just updated their model overnight. 50% of the use cases we previously deemed to be good are now generating different results. Now,
yeah, I think that's really interesting because for example, one of my partners at Artemis, we store a lot of metrics for clients. It's not Google Analytics, but I'll use Google Analytics as an example. It's actually all the infrastructure kind of metrics and everything. But for years you have to build these custom reporting dashboards. Things like Datadog, all like that. You've got to build your own custom reporting dashboards. It's all in a really obscure language, and it takes forever to do. And actually, taking MCPs as an example, pulling them back into what you were saying about having to answer those questions. You have an MCP that plugs into that, and then you put it on Claude, for example, and you say, right, I need to know all the information that's happened over the last 5 days in this particular server, whatever that may be, just trying to put it in simple terms, and it will go and build that dashboard for you immediately based off what you've asked and everything else. And that cuts down your workload by, tenfold from a monitoring and a governance perspective. And I think that's really where there's a lot of exciting stuff happening with MCPs right now. You can get it to control your emails, you can everything. I don't know if it's worth maybe it might be a little bit too technical for the podcast, but I think it might be good to just give a little bit of an overview on what your view is on MCPs and how they work.
I'll be very upfront. I don't know a great deal about them. I'm not an expert in that area. I find that it's a level of implementation I'm seeing, but I haven't really got into the detail on it.
Okay, yeah, same as me. But I just got a big lecture from one of my team about it yesterday, and I thought, well, that's really interesting.
I come back to I worry about this though, because this is actually what happens a lot. In any software engineering architecture, the fundamentals should be technology independent. And the architectural principles should be technology independent. And I get worried that I see a huge amount of implementation going on and a huge amount of project definition going on where there is a particular technology mandated, or a particular, even a particular product or even a particular version is being mandated as this is what we've got to do. So I'm working with an organization at the moment which is doing a huge amount of work on MCPs. And they're a company which focuses on generating communications material. So they're heavily invested in generative AI. They're a medium-sized company, probably a couple of hundred engineers working on products. And my big fear is everyone has latched on to the engineering of MCPs and how to do it and what's going on. And nobody has actually looked at the data. Nobody's actually looked at the AI problem they're trying to solve. And nobody has actually considered whether they're doing the right thing. And their core business is generating good communications. So if you imagine the BBC or CNN News, they're communications companies, and their entire reputation is dependent on the accuracy of the data, of the information they provide to their market. So if any of those, an organization like that, goes out and develops and embraces generative AI, and they focus their entire team on the technical feasibility and the integration issues of MCPs, and they don't look at the quality of the AI they're delivering, they are heading into trouble. And so, yes, I think this is a really important point to me. I think we've got to stop architecting, and it's been particularly bad with generative AI, and it's reinforced by what I'm seeing is punditry as opposed to expertise. So I'm seeing lots of people doing podcasts where they're talking about the latest versions of ChatGPT and the latest versions of products and so on. And I liken it to Clarkson, Hammond and May talking about Volvo are going to produce an e-version. Now, none of those three pundits, by the way, I love Clarkson, Hammond and May. Apologies, but I think they're brilliant. But none of them can go and build an e-vehicle. None of them can actually understand the engineering of it, whether it's the right thing to do. They're pundits. And we have far too many pundits talking about AI and not enough experts. And experts will always take you back to the raw data. And the main thing I'm trying to articulate to a lot of my clients is not just technical feasibility, but intelligence feasibility. Can the AI do what you need it to do? And
Definitely.
that actually should be product independent.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that's why we're here, right? Is that's why we well, it wasn't me, but Harrison and co-founded the Center for Gen AI Ops, is make sure we're doing this right, make sure we're doing it in a level-headed, organized way, and that's really the point of this podcast, is to go through that manifesto we've made to ensure people are, encourage people to adhere to those practices and those best practices, and make sure that things are done in a safe manner. So yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so I think that's pretty much the end of our time for today. But what James, what are you most excited for in terms of the future for Gen AI?
Well, I guess I can start off. I suppose, the hype is around the models. However, I'm excited for the actual application layer. As James said, the tooling around the generative AI, that's where the simplicity should be. I'm excited for when the tooling around generative AI to build in extremely capable and bespoke and effective systems improves, continues to improve, so that it isn't just sort of hype of a GPT-5 being released, but you get actual real bespoke use cases of generative AI performing well in practice that people love using.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the empowerment. So as an IBM engineer, all of us, IBM is full of highly creative people. And when I was at IBM, we all had more ideas than time and resources. And I remember an IBM engineer saying to me, every IBM engineer wants to get to the level where the company gives them 5 programmers and freedom to just go and work. And I think the IBM fellowship program, that's what you got. You have 3 years to build whatever you wanted with a small team of developers.
Oh, really?
That was many years ago. I don't think they do it now. But we always wanted, and I talked about the system I worked with the police on. And that was hamstrung by the fact I couldn't get the investment to build a development team around it. Since I've stepped back from being an executive and I've stopped doing PowerPoint and I've uninstalled Excel, I've actually really piled into these tools. And I'm discovering the things I needed a team to do 10 years ago, I can do in an hour whilst watching the television. I can go on, if you use the tools properly. If you go into some of these, Lovable and some of these tools and GPT, and you say to it, build me this huge system, bang, 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 and then it turns into a bit of a mess. If you go in and give it very, very tight prompts and you architect it and you bring it together. So I'm excited that I think we're empowering individual innovators, people who've been constrained by lack of resources, to be able to do things much more quickly, where they would have taken much more investment and much larger teams. And the problem with larger teams is not just that they cost more. The larger your team, people have their own ideas and want to do their own thing. They don't all behave themselves. So suddenly we really are empowering individuals to pursue their vision. And I think that's the thing that excites me most about the whole thing.
Okay. Well, Jamie, over to you. Let's wrap up.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, James, for the insight. I must say, I think it's the first person we've had on who's been working on AI since 11 years old. So it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for joining and sharing all of your insights.
My pleasure.
Definitely.
Cool.